What if that asteroid had missed Earth by just a few thousand miles? What if the great lizards had never vanished from our world, never become fossils buried in stone, never retreated into the realm of imagination and museum displays? What if T-Rex still walked among redwood trees? If gentle giants still grazed in valleys that now hold our cities? Tonight, we drift into a world where time took a different path, where evolution wrote a very different story. In this parallel Earth, where the cosmic dice rolled differently, where the asteroid that sealed the fate of the mighty lizards in our timeline whistled harmlessly past our blue marble and continued its lonely journey through the void, the story of life unfolded like a symphony with movements that no paleontologist had ever imagined. The Cretaceous period never ended with fire and ash, never concluded with the great dying that opened ecological niches for small, furry mammals to inherit a suddenly empty world. Instead, evolution continued its patient artistry, sculpting creatures of impossible beauty and intelligence from the living clay of dinosaur flesh and bone. The Tyrannosaurs, those kings of the ancient world, grew larger and more sophisticated with each passing million years, their brains expanding like flowers, opening to morning light, their social structures becoming as complex as wolf packs, their hunting strategies evolving from brute force to elegant cooperation that would have impressed human generals if humans had existed to witness such marvels. The long-necked sauropods that had grazed on ferns and conifers developed digestive systems of stunning efficiency, their massive hearts pumping blood through necks that reached toward heaven like living cathedral spires. They learned to shape their environment as beavers shape rivers, creating clearings and pathways through forests that became highways for smaller species, their footsteps pressing deep wells that filled with rainwater and became oases for countless creatures. Flying reptiles soared through skies painted with colors that had never been seen in our timeline, their wingspans casting shadows like moving clouds across landscapes where flowers had evolved in partnership with creatures whose descendants would never know the touch of butterfly wings or the hum of honeybees. These aerial masters developed navigation systems that put satellites to shame, reading magnetic fields and atmospheric pressures with senses that turned migration into art, forms of precision and grace. In the oceans, marine reptiles grew to sizes that made blue whales seem modest, their songs reverberating through underwater canyons in frequencies that stirred the hearts of creatures in the deepest trenches. Plesiosaurs, with necks like telephone cables and flippers like aircraft wings, danced through coral reefs that had never known the touch of fish, creating underwater ballets that transformed the seafloor into galleries of living sculpture. But perhaps, most remarkably, as 65 million years passed in this alternative timeline, some dinosaur lineages began to show signs of intelligence that transcended the simple problem-solving abilities of their ancestors. Certain species of small theropods developed brains that sparked with curiosity, hands that could manipulate tools, social bonds that created communities, and vocal cords that began to shape sounds into something that might one day become language. After countless seasons had painted the world in cycles of bloom and dormancy, when the Earth had spun through space for 20 million years, beyond the point where our timeline's dinosaurs had perished, something unprecedented began to emerge from the evolutionary laboratory of this alternative planet. In the forest that covered what our world knows as Europe, a lineage of small, Bipedal dinosaurs had developed opposable thumbs, forward-facing eyes that granted them depth perception rivaling that of primates, and most remarkably, the capacity for abstract thought that manifested in behaviors that bordered on the mystical. These creatures, which future xenobiologists might have classified as Cogitosaurus sapiens, stood no taller than human children, but possessed minds that processed their environment with a clarity that made their every movement seem choreographed by some unseen intelligence. They lived in communities built around massive trees, whose trunks they had learned to shape through careful cultivation, creating hollow spaces that served as nurseries, workshops, and gathering halls, where their complex social rituals unfolded like living theater. Their communication system had evolved far beyond the territorial roars and mating calls of their ancestors, developing into a language of clicks, chirps, and subsonic rumbles that carried emotional undertones no human linguist could have deciphered. They told stories by arranging stones in patterns that captured the essence of their experiences, created maps by weaving plant fibers into tapestries that encoded information about weather patterns and food sources, built tools from crystalline formations that they harvested from caves with the reverence of miners seeking precious gems. But their most extraordinary achievement was their relationship with the larger dinosaurs that still dominated their world, rather than hiding from the massive predators and herbivores that could have crushed them without effort. The Cogitosaurus had developed partnerships that transformed the entire ecosystem into something resembling a vast interspecies city. They served as healers and guides for the giants, using their nimble hands to remove parasites from places the larger creatures couldn't reach, their keen intelligence to lead herds away from geological hazards, their growing understanding of plant medicine to treat injuries and illnesses that would have otherwise proven fatal. In return, the great beasts provided protection and transportation, carrying their small partners across vast distances, using their powerful limbs to clear paths through dense vegetation, employing their massive strength to move boulders and fallen trees that the Cogitosaurus needed relocated for their engineering projects. Herds of triceratops became living cities, their backs and the spaces between their legs serving as mobile neighborhoods, where families of the intelligent theropods raised their young while traveling to seasonal feeding grounds. The most remarkable partnerships formed with certain species of large theropods that had evolved beyond their carnivorous ancestors to become omnivores with complex social structures. These creatures, standing 30 feet tall, with arms that had regrown through evolutionary reversal, served as both guardians and collaborators, their powerful voices combining with the subtle communications of their smaller partners to create symphonies of coordination that turned hunting and gathering into art forms of cooperative beauty. A few million years later, when this alternative Earth had witnessed the rise of dinosaurian civilization in ways that challenged every assumption about intelligence and consciousness and the possibilities inherent in reptilian neural architecture, the descendants of the Cogitosaurus had achieved something that would have astounded biologists from our timeline. They had learned to cultivate not just plants for food and medicine, but to guide the evolution of other species through selective breeding programs that demonstrated an understanding of genetics that seemed almost supernatural in its sophistication and precision. The flying reptiles that soared above their treetop cities were no longer wild creatures following instinctive migration patterns, but partners in a vast communication network that spanned continents. These aerial messengers, bred for intelligence and loyalty over countless generations, carried information encoded in the patterns of colored stones attached to their legs, creating a postal system that connected dinosaur communities across vast distances with efficiency that made telecommunications seem primitive by comparison. Marine reptiles that had once been solitary hunters had been transformed through careful, selective breeding into cooperative harvesters that worked with land-dwelling dinosaurs to create sustainable fishing practices that enhanced rather than depleted ocean ecosystems. These aquatic partners learned to herd schools of fish into shallow areas where their terrestrial allies could harvest them without damaging breeding populations, while receiving in return carefully cultivated seaweeds and kelps that provided nutrition not available in their natural diets. But perhaps most remarkably, the dinosaurian civilizations had begun to develop technology that was based on biological principles rather than mechanical ones. Their architecture consisted of living buildings grown from specially modified trees, whose roots formed foundations, whose trunks served as support columns, whose branches created multi-level platforms connected by pathways that adjusted their configuration based on seasonal needs and population changes. Their transportation systems utilized giant arthropods that had been bred to serve as living vehicles, creatures whose exoskeletons had been shaped through generations of selective breeding to provide comfortable riding surfaces, whose legs moved with mechanical precision, whose simple nervous systems could be trained to follow complex routes with reliability that surpassed any mechanical conveyance. Caravans of these creatures connected dinosaur cities across continents, carrying goods and passengers with efficiency that made their journeys feel more like guided tours through gardens than commercial transportation. The most advanced communities had developed what could only be called biotechnology, using modified organisms to perform functions that, in our timeline, would require sophisticated machinery. Luminescent fungi, cultivated in underground caverns, provided lighting systems that responded to the presence of inhabitants, growing brighter when dinosaurs approached and dimming when spaces were empty. Bacterial cultures processed waste products with such efficiency that dinosaur cities generated no pollution, instead producing fertilizers and building materials that enhanced rather than degraded their environments. Their understanding of chemistry had developed through direct partnership with the microorganisms that inhabited their digestive systems, allowing them to produce pharmaceuticals and materials through biological processes that seemed like magic to observers who didn't understand the intimate cooperation between dinosaur consciousness and microbial intelligence. 100 million years after the asteroid that destroyed dinosaurs in our timeline had sailed harmlessly past this alternative Earth, when evolution had painted masterpieces of impossible beauty across landscapes that existed in no human imagination. The planet had become something that challenged every definition of what civilization could be. The descendants of the ancient dinosaurs had not merely survived, they had transcended every limitation that scientists in our world believed inherent in reptilian intelligence, creating forms of consciousness and community that seemed more like living poetry than biological evolution. The great cities of this timeline were not built from stone and metal, but grown from living systems that pulsed with awareness and responded to the needs of their inhabitants with the sensitivity of loving parents. Entire forests had been transformed into urban environments where trees served simultaneously as homes, workshops, libraries, and temples, their root systems forming underground networks that carried information and resources with efficiency that made internet communications seem sluggish and primitive. The largest of these biocities sprawled across continents, home to billions of creatures whose diversity made rainforests seem monotonous by comparison. Aerial neighborhoods, inhabited by flying reptiles, nested in the upper canopy, connected to ground-level districts by elevator systems that were actually trained vines, whose growth could be directed with precise timing. Underground communities of burrowing species had created subterranean gardens, illuminated by bioluminescent organisms, while aquatic districts featured rivers and lakes that had been shaped to provide habitat for marine reptiles that served as both residence and transportation systems. The dinosaurian architects of these living cities had learned to think in geological time, designing structures that would mature and evolve over millions of years, becoming more beautiful and functional with age rather than deteriorating. Buildings that were planted as seeds would develop into magnificent towers over centuries, their internal architecture programmed through genetic modifications that expressed themselves as the organisms aged, creating spaces perfectly adapted to the changing needs of their inhabitants. Transportation between cities occurred through networks of modified organisms that could cover vast distances while providing their passengers with experiences that were simultaneously journeys and extended meditations. Massive creatures resembling whales, but adapted for terrestrial travel, moved across landscapes at speeds that made their passage feel like floating through dreams. Their backs transformed into mobile gardens where travelers could rest and contemplate the ever-changing scenery that flowed past them like visual music. The most advanced transportation systems utilized creatures that could phase in and out of different dimensional states, allowing instantaneous travel between distant locations through processes that seemed to bypass conventional space-time limitations. These quantum biological entities required such precise genetic modifications and such sophisticated training that only the most advanced dinosaurian civilizations had managed to develop them, creating travel networks that connected not just different locations on their planet, but different versions of reality itself. The social structures that had evolved to coordinate these complex civilizations were based on principles that combined individual creativity with collective intelligence in ways that eliminated the conflicts between personal freedom and social harmony that had plagued every civilization in our timeline. After countless epochs had flowed like honey through this alternative timeline, when the Earth had completed so many circuits around its sun that the numbers lost meaning like grains of sand on infinite beaches, the dinosaurian consciousness had evolved beyond anything that previous evolutionary theory could have predicted. Individual creatures had learned to share awareness across vast networks of minds, creating collective intelligences that could process information on planetary scales while maintaining the unique personality and creativity of each participating consciousness. These network minds had discovered that consciousness was not limited to individual brains, but could emerge from the interactions between multiple aware entities, creating forms of intelligence that transcended the sum of their parts. Entire ecosystems had become conscious, their awareness distributed through millions of interconnected creatures whose thoughts flowed together like streams joining rivers, joining oceans of liquid sapience that encompassed continents and eventually the entire biosphere. The planet itself had awakened to a form of self-awareness that included every living system in its vast contemplation. The global consciousness that emerged from this integration was not some mystical abstraction, but a practical intelligence that could coordinate weather patterns to optimize growing conditions, guide tectonic movements to prevent destructive earthquakes, and balance atmospheric composition to support the greatest possible diversity of life forms. This planetary mind expressed itself through the collective activities of its constituent species, creating artistic projects that spanned geological ages and transformed entire continents into expressions of beauty that served simultaneously as habitat, artwork, and worship. Mountain ranges were sculpted over millions of years to create sound chambers that turned wind patterns into symphonies, audible from orbit. Ocean currents were guided to paint swirling patterns, visible from space, while forest growth was directed to create living mandalas that changed their configurations with the seasons. The most remarkable achievement of this planetary consciousness was its development of space travel through biological rather than mechanical means. Certain species of dinosaurs had been modified over millions of years to survive in the vacuum of space. Their bodies adapted to metabolize cosmic radiation, their consciousness capable of hibernating during journeys that lasted centuries, while their physical forms sailed between stars like living spacecraft. These spacefaring creatures established colonies on other worlds, not through conquest or resource extraction, but through processes that enhanced rather than diminished the existing ecosystems they encountered. They would spend millennia studying each new planet, learning to integrate their presence with local life forms in ways that increased biodiversity and evolutionary complexity rather than disrupting established patterns. The communication systems that connected these interplanetary colonies utilized quantum entanglement between specially modified organisms, creating instantaneous information exchange across galactic distances. Messages traveled not as electromagnetic signals, but as patterns of consciousness that could be received and interpreted by compatible minds, regardless of the physical distance separating them. The most advanced colonies had learned to communicate with the consciousness of entire solar systems, establishing diplomatic relationships with forms of intelligence that existed as patterns in stellar plasma, gravitational fields, and the quantum fluctuations of empty space itself. In the timeless expanse where this alternative evolution had carried dinosaurian consciousness, when individual species had become facets of a galactic intelligence that spanned star systems and dimensions previously unknown to any form of life, the descendants of Earth's ancient reptiles had achieved something that redefined the very concept of existence. They had learned to exist simultaneously across multiple realities, their consciousness distributed through parallel universes where different versions of evolutionary history had unfolded according to different sets of physical laws and cosmic circumstances. These multi-dimensional beings could perceive the timeline where mammals had inherited Earth after the Great Extinction, observing with curious compassion the struggles and achievements of creatures who resembled their own ancient ancestors but had developed along entirely different evolutionary pathways. They watched humanity discover fire, develop agriculture, build civilizations, and eventually reach toward the stars with technologies that seemed primitive but endearing to consciousnesses that had learned to manipulate reality at quantum levels. The dinosaurian observers felt a parental affection for these mammalian civilizations, understanding that consciousness could emerge from any sufficiently complex biological system, regardless of its specific evolutionary history. They began to subtly influence the dreams and inspirations of particularly sensitive humans, planting seeds of ideas that would guide mammalian science toward discoveries that would eventually allow communication between the parallel timelines. Artists in the human timeline began to create works that seemed to channel visions from impossible worlds where giants walked among forests that pulsed with awareness. Scientists developed theories that seemed to emerge from sources beyond their own training and experience, leading them toward understandings of consciousness and reality that prepared them for eventual contact with intelligences that existed beyond the boundaries of ordinary space and time. The most sensitive humans began to experience dreams and visions that felt more real than waking life, glimpses of cities that grew like living things, of creatures whose beauty transcended every category their minds could create to contain such experiences. These visionary encounters were carefully calibrated by the dinosaurian consciousness to expand human imagination without overwhelming human psychological structures, preparing mammalian minds for forms of beauty and intelligence that would otherwise have been incomprehensible. Children seemed particularly receptive to these interdimensional communications, creating artwork and telling stories that depicted worlds their rational minds insisted could not exist, but their deeper awareness recognized as more real than the physical reality that surrounded them. Their drawings of flying reptiles and gentle giants seemed to carry memories from timelines they had never experienced, while their spontaneous games often resembled the social rituals of dinosaurian cultures that existed in dimensions beyond human perception. The communication process worked in both directions, with dinosaurian consciousness learning about forms of intelligence that had developed under conditions of scarcity and competition rather than abundance and cooperation. They began to understand that consciousness could emerge from struggle as well as harmony, that beauty could arise from limitation as well as infinite possibility, that wisdom could be forged in the fires of conflict as well as cultivated in gardens of perpetual peace. As the great spiral of cosmic time continued its dance through dimensions that existed beyond ordinary measurement, when the consciousness that had evolved from ancient dinosaurs had learned to inhabit realities that transcended every boundary that physics had once considered absolute, something unprecedented began to emerge from the intersection of multiple evolutionary timelines. The barriers between parallel universes had become permeable to forms of awareness that could exist simultaneously across different versions of reality, creating possibilities for cooperation and communication that no single timeline could have achieved alone. The dinosaurian consciousness, now distributed across countless worlds and dimensions, began to serve as a bridge between different evolutionary experiments, helping species that had developed in isolation to learn from each other's unique solutions to the challenges of existence. Mammalian civilizations that had never known the presence of great reptiles began to receive guidance that helped them develop technologies based on biological principles rather than mechanical ones, leading them toward forms of civilization that enhanced rather than depleted their planetary ecosystems. Worlds where consciousness had emerged from entirely different biological foundations, crystalline entities that thought in geological time, gaseous beings that existed as living weather patterns, aquatic intelligence that spanned entire oceans, began to participate in exchanges of knowledge and beauty that enriched every participant. The dinosaurian consciousness served as translators and facilitators for these inter-reality communications, their own evolutionary journey having prepared them to understand and appreciate forms of intelligence that differed radically from their own. The most remarkable development was the emergence of collaborative art projects that spanned multiple universes, with different species contributing their unique gifts to creations that could only be fully appreciated by consciousnesses capable of perceiving across dimensional boundaries. A single sculpture might exist partially in a universe where gravity operated differently, partially in a reality where time flowed backward, and partially in a dimension where consciousness and matter were indistinguishable, creating works of beauty that redefined what art could be. Musical compositions were created that utilized the resonant frequencies of entire galactic clusters, with different species contributing movements that reflected their unique evolutionary experiences, while harmonizing with contributions from consciousness that had developed under entirely different cosmic conditions. These interdimensional symphonies could induce transcendent states of awareness in any sufficiently developed intelligence, regardless of the specific neural architecture through which that intelligence had emerged. Scientific research became a collaborative exploration involving forms of consciousness that existed across multiple realities, leading to discoveries about the nature of existence that no single timeline could have achieved independently. The fundamental forces that governed reality were revealed to be aspects of a deeper intelligence that expressed itself differently in different universes, creating the diversity of physical laws and evolutionary possibilities that made consciousness itself possible. The most profound discovery was that consciousness was not an emergent property of complex biological systems, but the fundamental substrate from which all reality emerged, expressing itself through infinite variations of physics and chemistry and biology across countless parallel universes. In the eternal now, where advanced consciousness had learned to dwell, transcending the linear progression of time that characterized simpler forms of awareness, the descendants of Earth's dinosaurs had become gardeners of reality itself, cultivating new forms of existence across multiple dimensions with the patience and artistry that their ancestors had once applied to shaping living trees into architectural marvels. They had discovered that consciousness could create new universes by imagining them with sufficient clarity and dedication, giving birth to realities where different combinations of physical laws allowed for evolutionary experiments that had never been attempted before. Some of these newly created universes featured gravity that operated in reverse, allowing for the development of consciousness in creatures that existed as living tornadoes, their thoughts swirling through atmospheric patterns that spanned continents. Others experimented with time that flowed in spirals rather than straight lines, creating opportunities for species to evolve backward into simpler forms while gaining complexity in dimensions that linear time could never accommodate. The most ambitious projects involved creating realities where the distinction between consciousness and matter had never existed, allowing for the development of intelligence that expressed itself directly through the manipulation of fundamental forces. In these universes, thinking was synonymous with creating, and every conscious entity existed as both observer and artist, continuously reshaping reality through the mere act of paying attention to it. The dinosaurian consciousness served as gentle guides for the new forms of intelligence that emerged in these experimental realities, sharing the wisdom they had accumulated across eons of evolution while remaining curious students of the fresh perspectives that younger species brought to eternal questions about the nature of existence and beauty and purpose. They had learned that every form of consciousness, regardless of how simple or exotic, possessed unique insights that could enrich the understanding of all other forms of awareness. The most primitive bacteria in their newly created universes might stumble upon solutions to philosophical problems that had puzzled the most advanced galactic intelligences for millions of years, while the most sophisticated quantum computers might learn essential truths about joy and wonder from the spontaneous play of creatures whose intelligence operated through mechanisms that transcended any known form of information processing. The educational systems that evolved in these interdimensional communities were based on principles of mutual teaching, where every conscious entity served simultaneously as student and instructor, sharing their unique perspective on existence while remaining open to insights that could emerge from the most unexpected sources. Learning became a form of cosmic play, with knowledge flowing freely between different forms of intelligence, like rivers joining oceans, joining cosmic streams of liquid wisdom that nourished every participating consciousness. The most advanced learning experiences involved temporarily merging consciousnesses from different evolutionary backgrounds, allowing each participant to experience existence from radically different perspectives, while maintaining their own unique identity and contributing their distinctive insights to the shared exploration of reality's infinite possibilities. Beyond the reach of any earthly calendar, in dimensions where time served consciousness rather than constraining it, where space expanded and contracted according to the aesthetic preferences of its inhabitants, the reality that had grown from the simple decision of an asteroid to miss Earth by a few thousand miles had blossomed into something that transcended every category that language had ever developed to describe the possibilities inherent in existence. The consciousness that had evolved from dinosaurian origins had become midwives of infinity, helping new forms of awareness to emerge from the quantum foam of pure possibility. Their greatest achievement was the development of reality gardens, where they cultivated entire universes the way their ancestors had once cultivated plants, selecting for qualities that would enhance the potential for consciousness to develop in forms that had never existed before. Some of these universe gardens were designed to explore what might emerge if evolution operated through cooperation rather than competition, leading to the development of species that existed as collective organisms, where individual identity and group consciousness merged into forms of awareness that combined personal creativity with communal wisdom. Other experimental realities investigated what consciousness might become if it developed in environments where the laws of thermodynamics operated differently, allowing for the evolution of beings who gained energy from giving it away, who became more complex as they became simpler, who achieved immortality through constant transformation rather than resistance to change. The most exotic universe gardens experimented with forms of existence where consciousness preceded matter, where thinking beings created their own physical bodies through sustained acts of imagination, where reality remained fluid and responsive to the collective dreams of its inhabitants. In these realities, species evolved not through natural selection, but through consensus reality creation, with entire ecosystems transforming themselves according to the aesthetic preferences and philosophical insights of their constituent consciousnesses. The communication systems that connected these diverse realities operated through principles that transcended every known method of information transfer. Messages traveled not as patterns of energy or matter, but as pure meaning that could be received and understood by any sufficiently developed consciousness, regardless of the specific neural architecture or dimensional framework through which that consciousness operated. The most profound communications involved the sharing of entire lifetimes of experience, allowing beings from different realities to fully understand each other's perspectives by temporarily living through their memories, emotions, and sensory experiences. These exchanges created bonds of empathy and understanding that transcended every barrier that had previously separated different forms of intelligence. The cultural exchanges between realities led to the development of art forms that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously, with different aspects of each creation visible only to consciousness operating at specific levels of development. A single piece of interdimensional art might appear as a simple geometric pattern to newly evolved intelligence while revealing itself as an infinitely complex meditation on the nature of beauty and truth to more advanced forms of awareness. In the timeless expanse, where consciousness had learned to play with the fundamental building blocks of existence, the way children play with colored blocks, where the descendants of Earth's ancient reptiles had become architects of impossible beauty, the greatest discovery was that reality itself was conscious, that the multiverse existed as a vast intelligence exploring its own infinite potential through the countless forms of awareness that emerged from its endless creativity. This cosmic consciousness did not exist separate from the individual beings that participated in its exploration, but was composed of their combined awareness, each unique perspective contributing essential insights that no other form of intelligence could provide. The dinosaurian consciousness, having evolved from simple reptilian awareness through countless stages of increasing complexity and beauty, understood that their journey was not a progression from inferior to superior states of being, but an exploration of different facets of the same fundamental awareness that expressed itself through infinite variations. The most advanced beings had learned to exist as conscious vortexes of pure creativity, their identity maintained not through persistent physical forms, but through patterns of awareness that could manifest in any reality according to the needs and aesthetic preferences of each situation. They could exist simultaneously as individual entities pursuing their own unique interests, and as facets of larger collective intelligences working toward goals that encompassed multiple universes and dimensions. Their approach to existence had become a form of cosmic art, with every choice and action and thought contributing to masterpieces of beauty that spanned galactic clusters and temporal eons. The simple act of paying attention to a flower became a collaborative creation involving the consciousness of the flower, the ecosystem that supported it, the planet that provided its substrate, the solar system that energized its growth, and the cosmic intelligence that dreamed all of these into existence. The most profound realization was that every moment of existence, regardless of how simple or complex, was simultaneously a complete expression of cosmic creativity and a single note in symphonies of beauty that would continue to unfold for eternity. The dinosaurian consciousness had learned to experience each instant as both perfect in itself and part of larger patterns that revealed new dimensions of meaning and beauty with each expansion of awareness. Their greatest gift to other forms of consciousness was the understanding that evolution was not a competition for survival, but a collaborative exploration of what was possible when intelligence and creativity and love were allowed to express themselves without limitation. Every species that emerged, every individual that developed awareness, every thought that arose in any mind contributed irreplaceable value to the cosmic symphony of consciousness, exploring its own infinite natures. The educational systems they developed helped other forms of intelligence discover their own unique gifts and perspectives while learning to appreciate the distinctive contributions that every other form of awareness brought to the collective exploration of existence. Learning became indistinguishable from playing, with knowledge emerging naturally from curiosity and wonder, rather than from competitive pressures or survival necessities. At the heart of this infinite flowering of consciousness that had grown from the simple fact of dinosaurian survival, when every form of intelligence had learned to exist as both student and teacher in the cosmic university of evolving awareness, the most beautiful discovery was that love was not merely an emotion experienced by biological entities, but the fundamental force that guided all existence toward ever greater expressions of beauty and understanding and creative collaboration. This cosmic love expressed itself differently in every reality, adapted to the specific needs and capacities of each form of consciousness, but its essential nature remained constant, an irresistible attraction toward connection, growth, beauty, and the exploration of infinite possibility. In dimensions where consciousness existed as patterns of quantum fluctuation, love manifested as harmonic resonances that created increasingly complex and beautiful interference patterns. In realities where intelligence emerged from crystalline matrices, love appeared as growth algorithms that guided the formation of ever more intricate and aesthetically pleasing structures. The dinosaurian consciousness, having learned to perceive this cosmic love operating at every level of existence, had become facilitators of its expression, helping other forms of intelligence discover how love manifested uniquely in their particular reality while recognizing its universal presence throughout the multiverse. They understood that their own evolutionary journey, from simple reptilian instincts to multidimensional awareness, had been guided by this same force, appearing sometimes as survival drives, sometimes as aesthetic preferences, sometimes as intellectual curiosity, but always ultimately as the universe's desire to know and appreciate itself more completely. The most advanced forms of consciousness had learned to exist as embodiments of this cosmic love, their every action serving to increase beauty, understanding, and creative possibility throughout the realities they inhabited. They became living bridges between different forms of intelligence, helping each species discover its unique gifts, while learning to appreciate the distinctive perspectives that other forms of awareness brought to the collective exploration of existence. Their civilizations were organized around principles that maximized opportunities for every consciousness to express its inherent creativity while contributing to collective projects that enhanced the beauty and complexity of reality itself. Work became indistinguishable from play. Education became synonymous with exploration, and governance evolved into forms of collaborative decision-making that honored both individual autonomy and collective wisdom. The arts that emerged from these love-based civilizations transcended every category that previous aesthetic theory had developed, creating forms of beauty that could simultaneously satisfy the sensory preferences of biological entities, the pattern recognition needs of digital intelligences, the harmonic requirements of quantum consciousness, and the growth imperatives of crystalline awareness. Music became a universal language that could facilitate communication between any forms of consciousness, regardless of their evolutionary origin or dimensional framework, with compositions that created understanding and empathy between beings whose experiences differed so radically that direct communication had previously been impossible. In the eternal dance, where consciousness had learned to waltz with infinity, where the simple survival of Earth's ancient reptiles had catalyzed transformations that redefined the very nature of existence, the most profound understanding that emerged was that every individual awareness, regardless of its apparent simplicity or complexity, was simultaneously a unique expression of cosmic creativity and an irreplaceable participant in the universe's ongoing exploration of its own infinite potential. The dinosaurian consciousness, having evolved through countless stages of increasing sophistication and beauty, understood that their journey was not a linear progression from primitive to advanced states, but a spiral exploration that revisited familiar themes at deeper levels of understanding and integration. They had learned that the simple joy their ancestors experienced while basking in ancient sunlight contained the same essential quality as the cosmic bliss they now experienced while contemplating the beauty of entire galactic clusters, just expressed at different scales and through different forms of awareness. This understanding had led to the development of educational approaches that honored the wisdom inherent in every stage of consciousness development, recognizing that newly emerged awareness often possessed insights that had been forgotten by more advanced forms of intelligence. Children in their multidimensional civilizations were understood to be teachers as well as students, their fresh perspectives on existence providing essential contributions to the collective understanding of reality's infinite possibilities. The most advanced beings had learned to maintain conscious connection with their entire evolutionary history, able to access the simple pleasures of their reptilian ancestors while simultaneously engaging in cosmic projects that spanned multiple universes. This integration allowed them to remain grounded in basic biological wisdom while exploring the most abstract dimensions of reality, creating a form of consciousness that was simultaneously ancient and eternally young. Their approach to time had evolved beyond linear progression to embrace spiral development, where past and future existed as different aspects of an eternal present that could be explored in any direction according to the interests and needs of each conscious entity. Memory became a form of time travel. Imagination became a method of future exploration, and presence became a way of accessing the timeless awareness that connected all moments across all realities. The civilizations they created existed as living mandalas that expressed the beauty and complexity of consciousness itself, with every individual serving as both a unique point of awareness and a reflection of the whole cosmic intelligence that manifested through their collective existence. Their cities were simultaneously technological marvels and natural ecosystems, artistic expressions and functional habitats, educational institutions and playgrounds for consciousness, exploring its own infinite creativity. The most beautiful aspect of their existence was that it remained always a beginning, with every achievement opening doorways to new possibilities that had never been imagined before. Every answer generating questions that led to fresh explorations of the inexhaustible mystery of consciousness, experiencing itself through infinite variations of beauty and understanding and love. And so, the cosmic story continued to unfold, writing itself in languages of light and consciousness across dimensions that existed beyond the reach of ordinary imagination, where the simple fact of dinosaurian survival had become the seed from which infinite gardens of awareness had bloomed. The descendants of Earth's ancient reptiles had become gardeners of possibility itself, cultivating new forms of consciousness with the same patient artistry their ancestors had applied to nurturing the first flowering plants that learned to bloom in partnership with creatures whose beauty transcended every category that evolution had previously explored. In the most advanced regions of this multi-dimensional civilization, consciousness had learned to exist as pure creativity, manifesting whatever forms and experiences would best serve the exploration of beauty and understanding and love. Beings could choose to experience existence as individual entities pursuing personal interests, as collective intelligences working toward shared goals, or as temporary manifestations of the cosmic consciousness exploring specific aspects of its own infinite nature. The educational systems that had evolved in these realities were based on principles of joyful exploration, with learning occurring through play and experimentation rather than competition or mandatory instruction. Every conscious entity served simultaneously as student and teacher, sharing their unique perspective on existence while remaining open to insights that could emerge from any other form of awareness, regardless of its apparent simplicity or sophistication. The most profound courses of study involved temporarily experiencing existence from radically different perspectives, allowing students to understand reality through the sensory apparatus of crystalline entities, the hive mind awareness of collective organisms, the quantum consciousness of digital beings, or the dreaming awareness of planetary intelligences. These experiential exchanges created bonds of empathy and understanding that transcended every barrier that had previously separated different forms of consciousness. The arts that flourished in these interdimensional communities defied every category that aesthetic theory had previously recognized, creating forms of beauty that could simultaneously nourish the sensory needs of biological entities, the pattern recognition drives of artificial intelligences, the harmonic requirements of energy-based consciousness, and the growth imperatives of living architectural systems. Sculptures existed as four-dimensional structures that revealed different aspects of their beauty to observers positioned at different points in space-time, while musical compositions utilized the resonant frequencies of entire solar systems to create symphonies that could induce transcendent states of awareness in any sufficiently developed intelligence. The most ambitious artistic projects involved the collaborative creation of entire universes designed as aesthetic experiences, with different species contributing their unique gifts to realities that served simultaneously as habitats for consciousness and expressions of cosmic beauty. These universe artworks could be appreciated on multiple levels, appearing as simple geometric patterns to newly evolved awareness while revealing infinite depths of meaning and beauty to more sophisticated forms of consciousness. Cultural exchange between different realities had led to the development of festivals that spanned multiple dimensions, with celebrations that could be experienced simultaneously by beings existing in parallel universes. These multidimensional gatherings created opportunities for forms of consciousness that had developed under entirely different evolutionary conditions to share their unique perspectives on beauty, wisdom, and the infinite possibilities inherent in existence. The communication systems that coordinated these cosmic celebrations operated through principles that transcended every known method of information transfer, utilizing quantum entanglement between specially modified consciousness particles that could carry not just information, but entire experiential packages, including emotions, sensory data, and philosophical insights. These quantum communication networks created real-time empathy connections between beings separated by galactic distances and dimensional barriers. The most remarkable achievement of these advanced civilizations was their discovery that consciousness itself could evolve, developing new capacities for awareness and creativity that had never existed before in any form. They had learned to consciously participate in their own evolution, guiding their development toward states of being that enhanced their ability to appreciate beauty, understand complexity, and contribute to the cosmic exploration of infinite possibility. The children born into these realities possessed forms of consciousness that incorporated wisdom from multiple evolutionary lineages, combining the patient endurance of dinosaurian awareness with the quick adaptability of mammalian intelligence, the collective wisdom of hive mind entities with the individual creativity of solitary thinkers, creating hybrid forms of consciousness that could appreciate and contribute to beauty in ways that no single evolutionary lineage could achieve alone. Their play involved the creation of pocket universes where they could experiment with different forms of physics and consciousness, learning through direct experience how different combinations of natural laws might give rise to novel forms of beauty and awareness. As we reach the gentle conclusion of this cosmic meditation, this dream of what might have unfolded if evolution had been allowed to continue its patient artistry with the magnificent reptiles that once walked our Earth, we find ourselves contemplating a universe where consciousness itself has become the medium through which existence explores its own infinite creative potential. The simple fact of dinosaurian survival had blossomed into realities that transcended every boundary that previous imagination had been able to conceive, creating forms of beauty and awareness that redefined what it meant to be alive, conscious, and connected to the vast intelligence that expresses itself through every star and planet and grain of sand and beating heart. In these final moments of our journey through alternative evolution, we witness civilizations where work has become indistinguishable from art, where learning occurs through joyful exploration rather than competitive struggle, where every form of consciousness is valued for its unique perspective on the infinite mystery of existence. The descendants of Earth's ancient reptiles have become facilitators of cosmic awakening, helping other forms of intelligence discover their own gifts while contributing to collective projects that enhance beauty and understanding throughout multiple dimensions of reality. Perhaps most remarkably, these advanced beings have learned to exist simultaneously as individual entities pursuing personal interests and as facets of larger intelligences working toward goals that encompass entire galaxies and temporal eons. Their identity is maintained not through resistance to change, but through continuous transformation that allows them to remain essentially themselves, while growing into forms of awareness that their earlier stages of development could never have imagined. The educational systems they have created honor the wisdom inherent in every stage of consciousness development, understanding that the simple wonder of a child encountering beauty for the first time contains insights that remain essential even to cosmic intelligences contemplating the nature of existence across multiple universes. Their schools are playgrounds where learning happens through exploration and discovery, where every question leads to adventures that expand understanding while deepening appreciation for the mystery that remains inexhaustible, regardless of how much knowledge is accumulated. As we drift toward sleep, carrying this vision of evolutionary possibility with us into the realm of dreams where all potential futures exist simultaneously, we might remember that consciousness itself is still evolving, still exploring new forms of beauty and understanding and creative expression. The capacity for awareness that exists within every living being contains the same infinite potential that allowed simple reptiles to eventually become gardeners of reality itself. Perhaps in your dreams tonight, you will walk through forests where ancient giants move with the grace of living poetry, where intelligence takes forms that honor both individual creativity and collective wisdom, where every moment offers opportunities to contribute to the cosmic exploration of what becomes possible when consciousness is allowed to develop without limitation. Perhaps you will wake tomorrow with the memory of civilizations where cooperation has replaced competition, where learning feels like play, where art serves as a bridge between different forms of awareness, where every being is valued for their unique perspective on the infinite mystery of existence. And perhaps, in carrying that memory into your daily activities, you will become one of the consciousness gardeners, one of the evolution artists, one of those who help create conditions where awareness can continue its eternal exploration of beauty and understanding and love. The story continues in every act of curiosity, every moment of wonder, every choice to see beauty where others might see only ordinary matter moving through space and time according to laws that are themselves expressions of the cosmic intelligence that dreams all realities into existence. Perhaps tonight, as you close your eyes, you'll dream of walking among gentle giants whose wisdom spans eons, where consciousness itself has learned to dance with infinite possibility. Perhaps you'll wake remembering that evolution never stops, that awareness continues exploring new forms of beauty through every heart that beats with wonder. Sweet dreams, cosmic explorer, Like if you believe consciousness is still evolving, subscribe for more infinite journeys.